the breakdown. Cody and I are going to go through every week and discuss the Sunday school lesson to help our Sunday school teachers out. And this is something that we're going to try to do every week going forward. So this week's lesson is going to be from Luke 21, 5 to 19. And we're just going to go through and talk about some of these things. So Cody, we've had an opportunity to kind of look through the Sunday school lesson, and one of the questions that I have highlighted here is what books or movies have depicted the events and signs of the last days? And are there any movies, or it could be books or anything like that, that really stick out to you? And it could be like biblical last days, or it could even be like just fun movies that depict like the end times or something.
There's a bunch of movies. The first one that comes to mind is Armageddon, and then you've got Apocalypse Now. There's a spinoff of the end times probably in every generation of a movie that's created. So there's plenty to pick from, but Armageddon was the first one that popped in my mind.
Yeah. For some reason, The Matrix popped into my mind. I don't know why, but it's kind of like...
It is kind of like an end times...
We know it is done. And,
yeah. AI has taken over.
Yeah, AI has taken over. That's fun stuff, some fun stuff. So we all have these ideas of the end times and what's happening, what we think is going to happen. And so as we're getting into Luke 21, the disciples are sitting down with Jesus, and they are describing the temple and how beautiful I think it is. So I'm going to read 5, I think this first section is what, 5 to 9. So it says the following. It says, some were talking about the temple, how it was adorned with beautiful stones and gifts dedicated to God. He said, these things that you see, the days will come when not one stone will be left on another that will not be thrown down. Teacher, they asked him, so when will these things happen? And what will be the sign when these things are about to take place? Then he said, watch out that you're not deceived, for many will come in my name, saying, I am he, and the time is near. Do not follow them. When you hear of wars and rebellions, don't be alarmed. Indeed, it is necessary that these things take place first, and the end won't come right away. So what are some things that kind of stick out to you from this passage about what Jesus is saying in the end times and stuff like that?
Well, one of the first things that sticks out to me here is the warning of don't listen to people who say that they know when it is. Jesus, multiple times throughout the New Testament, even the disciples after Jesus ascends and writes, they say multiple times, nobody knows. Nobody knows the time of the return. And we see it now today. We have a bunch of people that say that they know when the return's coming, and this is the day, and what's going to happen. But really, if you get down to brass tacks about it, nobody knows. And Jesus lays it out here in Luke. If anybody says they do, don't listen to them.
Yeah, I'm reminded of some of the historical things that have happened in the last 50-ish years. We've had a lot of cults and a lot of things pop up where people say the end times are coming and we have to do something about it. One of those is David Koresh and the Branch Davidians in Waco, Texas. And he claimed to be the Messiah, and they had an issue when they all, there was a whole bunch of them that were killed, took their lives, things like that. Then we also have Jim Jones, cult leader that went down to Guyana and
drink the Kool-Aid.
Drink the Kool-Aid. That's where we get that from. But they drank the poison-laced Kool-Aid because they thought the end was there. So Jesus foresaw things like that happening, and he's telling them, if you hear people saying that they're the Messiah and they're coming back, don't believe them at all. Run away from that.
Right.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Another point in there, and it's kind of with that, but he says that when you hear of wars and calamities and stuff like that, don't be alarmed. And I think a lot of times, especially today, we see these wars overseas, the Russia-Ukraine war, Israel, and we get kind of concerned because it could be relating back to Jesus saying these are things going to happen when I return. But it says here, don't worry. Those things have to happen. That doesn't necessarily mean it's close to me coming back, but these things do happen. I'm in total control, and I think that's the one thing we have to remember is as much as we would like to know beforehand, God is in total control, and we aren't to worry about those things that really don't matter.
Yeah, I think it's very telling here at the end of verse 9. And Jesus says, when you hear of wars and rebellions, don't be alarmed. Indeed, it's necessary that these things take place first, but the end won't come right away. So
Right.
he's even in the middle of that saying, look, all this stuff's going to happen, but there is no, like, that doesn't mean the end is there.
Right.
There are many other things that have to happen first. And, I think a lot of times we get caught up with the idea, kind of like what you said, of the end is here and we get anxious about it. Well, we just need to relax and let Jesus take care of it and realize that he has everything under control and we don't.
Right.
One of the things I wanted to point out too is there's a interesting connection here between what was coming shortly in Jesus's time and then what was going to take a while to happen. So there's this idea, verse 5 is asking in 6, talking about how the temple is going to be destroyed. We saw that happen in AD 70.
Right.
So this happened very close to the disciples' time when Jesus is talking about this. But then he's also kind of equating the temple being torn down and the end times. Those things are really compressed together in what he's talking about, but there's a lot of time in between the two.
Mm-hmm.
So there are signs of things happening. One of those is the temple being torn down, and then there's this large span of time which we're currently in when we're waiting for Jesus to come back and the end to happen. And so it looks like all this is compressed together, but it's actually spread out over a long time. Anything else stand out to you from these verses?
Really, I like the parallels between Matthew, Mark, and Luke here. But if you notice, Matthew and Mark really kind of push more towards the end times. You'll see a lot more of their detail being towards when Jesus returns. And Luke is really kind of focused on the destruction of the temple at that moment.
Yeah.
And because of that, and this is kind of just something I took out of my personal study when I was going through it, is most of us need to have that Luke perspective of let's deal with the right now. Let's let what's going to come.
Yeah. Well, I think it goes back to that whole letting Jesus take care of it.
Yeah.
Not be anxious about things. Yeah, I think that's a great way that's being pointed out. All right. Anything else from these first 5 to 9 verses 5 to 9?
I don't think so.
Okay. Let's look at the second part. It's verses 10 to 19. Do you want to read that one?
Yeah, sure.
Let's start with the first one.
Verse 10 in Luke 21 says, Then he told them, Nation will be raised up against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be violent earthquakes and famines and plagues in various places, and there will be terrifying sights and great signs from heaven. But before all these things, they will lay their hands on you and persecute you. They will hand you over to the synagogues and prisons, and you will be brought before kings and governors because of my name. This will give you an opportunity to bear witness. Therefore, make up your minds, not to prepare your defense ahead of time. For I will give you such words and wisdom that none of your adversaries will be able to resist or contradict. You will even be betrayed by parents, brothers, relatives, and friends. They will kill some of you. You will be hated by everyone because of my name, but not a hair of your head will be lost. By your endurance, gain your lives.
Mm-hmm. Man, that's a tough passage.
It is.
What are some things that really stick out to you from this passage?
So actually, it's kind of cool how this happened, but this particular piece of passage does connect back to what the youth kind of went through with Strength to Stand. The very first night we were there, the Pastor Richter was up there, and he talked about the cost and what it looks like for the cost to follow Jesus. And I think in Luke here in verses 10 through 19, it pretty much lays out the cost of being a follower, and it's not very pleasant things. But Luke, like Tom Richter said in if you look back in Matthew chapter 13, verse 44, he's talking about the parable of the hidden treasure. The guy gave up everything he had to buy the property because the treasure was buried there and he only knew it was there. And that's kind of the return we have. It does cost a lot. We see that here in 10 through 19. But the good news is there's so much more gained when that cost is given.
There's a huge gain to following after Jesus, and that's made really clear. I love how Jesus goes through too, and he's talking about the end times, and he gives some more updates of things that are pointing towards the end times, and he talks about nation will be raised up against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be violent earthquakes and famines and plagues in various places. So he's going and terrifying sights and great signs from heaven. So he's giving us all these political and societal issues that are going to be happening at
Right.
the end times. But kind of like he did up in the first section that we read, he gives a caveat and a but. But before all these things happen, they will lay their hands on you and persecute you. And so there are so many things that will happen still. And I think that we're seeing like a precursor to a lot of those things. We do have a lot of earthquakes. We have a lot of tornadoes and hurricanes, and there are wars being fought. But I think those, even considering the big wars that we've seen in the past, like World War I, World War II,
Mm-hmm.
and the things that happened there, I think those are small in comparison to what's coming.
Oh yeah.
And so these are just reminding us of what's happening. But during this time of quote unquote, and I'm saying this in quotation marks, the small things,
Yeah.
these small plagues, these small wars, compared to what's coming, we're still going to be persecuted for our belief in Jesus Christ.
Right.
And that is something that we as the American church know very little about, because we've had freedom of religion for the last almost 250 years. And we have freedom to come to church. We have freedom to worship. We have freedom to do all the things that we do. And we're not used to that, but we are getting persecuted.
Yeah.
I was reading an article. It was in the Baptist paper. I can't remember the exact figures, but there's been a huge uptick in persecution of the church just in the last year.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that's really strange to us, because we don't see it here,
Right.
but it's happening at an increased pace around the world.
And I think
what this says.
Yeah, and I think we see it here. We just don't see it to the level of where people are at around the world, because we see the Bible being pulled out of school systems where it once was. We see the Bible being pulled out of politics where it once was the foundation. We see our kids being pulled away from church for different things, sporting events, other things that are held to a higher importance than just going to church. So we're seeing that the slow degradation of our faith in our society. But it's not to the point of these third world countries that literally, if you openly pronounce your faith, they kill you immediately. But the scary thing is, it could easily get that way quickly. You can see that in some of these countries that were once foundationally Christian are now complete opposite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely been a slide that's been happening. What do you think of verse 14? It says, "Therefore make up your minds not to prepare your defense ahead of time, for I will give you such words and wisdom that none of your adversaries will be able to resist or contradict." How does that? What do you think of that?
So I think what he's saying there, and this is just me kind of reading through the context of this, but also using part of Matthew, and I can't remember exactly where it is in Matthew, where he says, "Let your yes be yes and your no be no." I don't think he's saying here, go ahead and make up your minds of what you believe. I think he's saying you need to decide where you stand and stand firm. It's either a yes or a no for me. And if it is a yes, stand firm on that. If it's a no, stand firm on that. But he's just saying, like, make up your mind, decide yes or no, but don't prepare your defense ahead of time. Don't sit there and build up this argument that you've got for a fight that you don't even know you're going to fight yet. That's not good planning. But he does want you to stand firm on your beliefs.
Yeah, I couldn't have said that any better. He's definitely not telling us not to study, not to learn God's word, not to memorize His word. He's not saying that.
Right.
And I think you said it about as well as it can be said. Like, you need to make sure that you know what God's word says, but don't worry about what you're going to say at that exact time in front of the leaders or the people that are persecuting you. Like, God will give you exactly what to say when you need to say it.
Right, and it kind of brings me to Stephen. before the stoning of Stephen. He's standing there and he has no idea what to say. But all of a sudden, when he's speaking, the Spirit just gives him everything he needs to say. And in the meantime, while he's saying these, yes, they're stoning him, but he feels nothing because he's in that spiritual force of Jesus is protecting him. And he ends up going home. But I think that's kind of what he means here is don't worry about what to say then. Let me handle that. You just worry about foundationally being solid and don't listen to all the garbage around you.
Yeah. Man, couldn't be said better. The last little section here, I find it really an interesting couple verses. It's in verse 16, you will even be betrayed by parents, brothers, relatives, and friends, and they will kill some of you.
Yeah.
You will be hated by everyone because of my name, but not a hair of your head will be lost. By your endurance, you gain your life. So I'll play a little devil's advocate here, but how is he in good conscience, Luke, or Jesus is saying this, Luke is writing it down. How is Jesus saying that, you're going to die, some of you are going to die, you're going to be persecuted, but not a hair of your head will be lost? How is Jesus saying that in good conscience? Again, I'm playing devil's advocate here.
Right. I think he's literally saying, look, what you see as harm to your body is really not even close to important to you. I mean, this world, this earthly form you have is not what you need to be concerned about. And it kind of goes back to before, like when he says what we talked about earlier, prepare your words of wisdom and know what you're doing here. Know that this is not where you're from. You have so much more after we cross that threshold of death. And he's saying here, like, you will be betrayed. You will be killed. Some of you will die at the hands of your family. But know that once that happens, you're in your perfected form. Mm-hmm. That after that, it really doesn't matter. And you won't even think about that. It'll be gone.
Yeah, I think that's 100% right. And what I find really interesting is the emphasis that Jesus always puts on the eternal. He does emphasize the current corporal state that we're in, but he's always more concerned about eternity.
Right.
And so when we look at this from an eternal perspective, yes, we may suffer on earth for a little while, but we know that our future, if we are Christ, is in heaven, and we are protected for eternity.
Like
right. We are saved for eternity.
Right. And I think that's what he means in verse 19 here. He's carrying that over. He's saying, yeah, you're going to die, but because of your endurance, you gain your lives. He's not saying that you're going to die then live again. He's saying you might die, but the more you endure for me here, the better you're going to be in heaven.
Yeah, I think what he's saying too, like it goes back to that whole argument that Paul has, and we have to work out our salvation.
Yeah.
Paul's not saying that we're saved by our works, because we're not. We're saved by the grace of God. But our works are demonstrating our salvation, and we are doing works to prove over and over and over again that we're saved.
Yeah.
Again, our works doesn't save us, but if we don't have those works, then we have to question ourselves as to whether or not we're saved or not. And so Jesus is alluding to that here. We're enduring what God has asked us to do. We're enduring for Him, and that's just proof that our lives are secure in Him when we're living for Him.
And the best way I have to explain that, now this is the way I explain it to the youth, is faith with works is like a relationship. And for us, it would be marriage. For them, it could be boyfriend and girlfriend, but not us to each other. Our wives, if we only loved our wives the day of our marriage, and then we didn't love her again from that point on, the marriage would be miserable. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like our relationship and our faith with Jesus. If we don't work on that relationship day in and day out and work hard towards the other person and try to do things and grow in each day and do things that He asks us to do, that's works with faith, because you love that person initially, but you're carrying out those processes to show that you continue to love that person. Yeah. And this is the same way with your faith and works. You believe in Jesus, but for every day you have to live your life to prove that you are loving Jesus. And it's not that that's going to get you to heaven, but it does show that you actually do. Yeah. So that's one of the best ways I've ever been able to explain it to a teenager of what the faith and works looks like.
It's a great illustration. I love it. All right, so that brings us to the end of the section. What are one or two big points or main points, takeaways that you see from here? And if you need to think for a second, I can go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
So a couple of the big things that I take away from this are one, we need to not be anxious about current events.
Right.
I know watching the news, watching elections, watching the results of wars, and all the things that we see on the news, it's really easy for believers to get really anxious about things.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to realize that Jesus is in control. These things are predicted. We know they're going to happen, even in more detail than what he's talking about, because he's giving the big picture.
Right.
But there's a lot of these little things that are happening, and we know that Jesus is not going to come back until it's the right moment.
Right.
And so we have to take a step back. The second thing that really, like, the kind of the big picture from this stands out to me is that we are going to suffer, and we are guaranteed persecution no matter what.
Yep.
And we've been very thankful in America for not going through that, but who knows when that's going to end, and we will be persecuted, and we need to prepare now for that possibility that is very likely in this country.
Yep.
And so we need to make sure we know God's word, and we're studying, we're growing in our faith, so when those difficult times do come, we will become immovable in our faith no matter what happens to us.
Right.
Those are two things that really stuck out to me.
So one thing that, and it really is one thing that really kind of I pulled out of this, and it's one of the questions that is asked in the introduction here on the weekly Bible study. The question is, do you think it's important to know what the Bible says about the end times? Why or why not? And why do you think Jesus taught about the events of the future? And I think this one question can literally encompass this entire study in the fact that, yes, it is important to know the end times. It's the end of the story. It's what allows us to believe and know that Jesus is who he says he is. Because without the end times, without revelation, without him returning, none of this means anything. So it's important to know that, but we don't need to get hung up on it. Like, there's a lot of people, and it's really hard to kind of separate yourself from that. But there's a lot of people that do nothing but want to study the book of Revelation and dig deep and know what it means and try to figure out what Jesus really means in Revelation. There's a reason why it's so complicated, and that's because we're not to know specifics about the end time. For whatever reason, that's the way God wanted it. Mm-hmm. So sometimes we can get to the point that we're so drowned by the fact that we want to understand the end times. But the reason he tells us about future events, to give us an idea, is not to make us wonder, but to give us comfort. Yep. He's saying, look, there is end times. There's going to be tribulation coming, but don't worry, I've overcome the world. I'm telling you the future so you know that I've overcome it. Yep. Be with me in those moments, but in the meantime, don't get hung up on the ending. Let's get through the middle. Let's focus on your relationship with me. That way, your faith with works throughout the time you walk grows you to be more like me. That way, when it comes to it, these decisions are easier. Yeah. And then what we also see here is he is telling the future also to show you the past. The future is you no longer have to come to sacrifice. I am the sacrifice. When I return, your debt is paid as long as you've said yes. And that's really just, it boils it all down to know the future. Read it. Be aware of what he says, but don't be like the disciples right before he ascends and just stand there staring at the sky waiting for the return while you're reading Revelation.
Be like the disciples after the angels came.
Right, yeah. Be like the disciples after the angels said, hey, there's work to be done. Why are you standing around?
Back to work.
Yeah.
Back to work.
So.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up about people focused on the end times, because I know that a lot of people focus on Revelation. They spend a whole lot of time studying that, and hopefully they're studying the things that we need to be doing nowadays. Just
Yeah,
much
I mean,
more.
it's important to study Revelation.
Yeah,
It really is,
100%
but
important.
no more important than any other book in the Bible.
But that's for the future. We need to make sure we know what we're supposed to be doing now.
Exactly.
I think you hit the nail on the head on that one. So cool. Is there anything else that kind of stuck out to you, or
That's about it.
cool? Well, man, this was fun, and we'll try to keep doing this every week. So, church, be looking for the breakdown every week.
And I'll have some cool graphics next time.
That'll be good. See you later.